Ending a wild week for the Bitcoin exchange, Mt. Gox has filed for bankruptcy, bringing to a close at least this chapter in the virtual currencies history. Rick Newman joining me now to talk about what the future is for Bitcoin, assuming there is one. And I will say it seems like there is a future for Bitcoin because the price of Bitcoin stabilized earlier this week, announced back in the mid 500s. It seems like Bitcoin has survived the Mt. Gox implosion, but what are the lessons here? What would you be thinking about if you were an investor in Bitcoin right now?
Well, I'd be thinking, I think I kind of prefer something that looks more like a traditional bank as a place to store my Bitcoin rather than something that used to, a little startup in in Japan. I mean, when we learn more about Mt. Gox and where it came from, I mean, it started up doing something completely different, almost got into Bitcoin on a whim. It was kind of like this guy running it said, oh, what's the trendy thing that I might get into now? He was just dabbling for a while, and look what happened. I mean, they did not have good procedures for safeguarding people's money. And things like that. And that money, it's almost $500 million. Looks like it's just disappeared.
Yes, almost $500 million has gone poof, essentially. And I don't think there's any recourse for the folks who had their Bitcoin at Mt. Gox because it's not regulated by anybody. Janet Yellen of the Federal Reserve was asking about this yesterday, saying, we have no authority to regulate Bitcoin. Nobody, apparently, in the regulatory world has authority to regulate Bitcoin. And that is what people who like Bitcoin like about it. But if that's the kind of environment you want, you're going to get instances like Mt. Gox where either out of stupidity or thievery, money is just going to disappear. And you have to ask yourself, is that the kind of investment I want to make and the kind of capitalism I want to be a part of?
Yeah, well, when you don't have any regulatory framework, who benefits most from that is thieves, black market type activities and so forth. And, there's so many ironies around this, it's almost becoming trite to say it, but Bitcoin supposedly thrives on transparency, but it needs to be managed through exchanges that in this case obviously had no transparency. So if anybody knew what was happening at Bitcoin, at Mt. Gox, we would have had the equivalent of a run on the bank. We did see a little bit of that, but you need to know what's happening at your Bitcoin exchange.
Yeah, you do. And look, the other folks who run Bitcoin's exchanges and people in the Bitcoin community were saying we knew there were problems at Mt. Gox for a long time. The procedures there were either missing or just really...
That's not entirely reassuring because if they knew that, why didn't they do something about it?
Well, what could they do, I guess is the question. If you're Coinbase or you're Bitstamp, what can you do about Mt. Gox other than to quietly say to people, hey, maybe you should have your money somewhere else other than
that does not sound like a stable financial system.
Well, it is.
The banks, if you will, are bad-mouthing each other as a form of regulation. So your point is the right one, I think, Aaron, which is this is potentially chaotic sometimes. And if you want to play in that world, I mean, it really reinforces this is a world for speculators and not for ordinary people seeking currency as a store of value.
Right, exactly. And again, if you're a proponent of Bitcoin, and Ezra Galston is one, he's a venture capitalist, he's an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today basically saying, hey, we need to think about some regulation for Bitcoin, having some kind of exchange that is regulated. And I know that there are people out there saying, no, we can't do it because that would be the end of what makes Bitcoin great, and then we're going to be subject to all kinds of rules and regulations and yes, somebody would actually know where the money is going. But if it's going to have a long-term viable future, I think there's got to be, even within the Bitcoin community, if they do it themselves, if they self-regulate, although we saw on Wall Street, that doesn't work so well, they need something to reassure people who've been thinking about getting into Bitcoin who are now saying there's no way I'm going to put money in Bitcoin.
I think it's a question of what do you want Bitcoin to be. So maybe this is kind of an identity crisis for Bitcoin. Do you want Bitcoin to be sort of a niche alternative to traditional currencies? And if so, perhaps it can continue on in this way, but you have to accept it will probably be the currency of choice for black marketeers, people doing criminal activity. If you want it to be a mass market currency that ordinary consumers will use and ordinary shops will adopt en masse, I think it's clear you have to have a regulatory framework for it. That will give it credibility. What it lacks right now is credibility.
I agree, and again, it's a great way to put it. Bitcoin, what do you want to be when you grow up? Let us know what you think in the comment section below or look us up on Twitter and Facebook.
Yahoo!